Let's begin here because too many believe that connection must be proven with constant words, with messages, with endless proof of loyalty. Yet the deepest bonds often reveal themselves in silence, in subtle rhythms the mind cannot measure. A woman feels a sudden wave of calm and only later discovers he was thinking of her at that exact hour. A man wakes with heaviness in his chest, unaware that someone he loves was facing sorrow in that same moment. What we call coincidence is rarely so simple. The soul has a language of its own, and it does not rely on clocks or logic. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now think of how often the modern world demands evidence. We are trained to doubt anything that cannot be explained. Yet there are moments when explanation falls away, and what remains is presence itself. Jung described this as synchronicity, two events that appear unrelated yet strike the soul with undeniable meaning. It is not fantasy, nor is it telepathy. It is a quiet resonance, like two instruments across a room vibrating to the same note. This is the mystery of being thought of, even when no words are spoken. Many dismiss these stirrings as imagination. They bury them under the persona, the mask that insists only the rational is real. But the shadow knows otherwise. The shadow feels the sudden pull, the dream that lingers, the silence that is strangely alive. And if we listen, we realize that the psyche is not a closed chamber. It is part of a wider field, what Jung called the collective unconscious. Within that field, emotion moves like water. When two people share intensity, love longing, even conflict, a current forms. That current flows beneath awareness, shaping mood, stirring memory, even reaching across distance. One feels anxious, without cause, the other restless, without reason, both carried by the same hidden tide. The truth is simple, but difficult connection is not always visible, but it is often felt. Our culture teaches us to doubt these signals, to dismiss them as coincidence or wishful thinking. Yet the soul recognizes what the mind resists. What we feel deeply leaves traces, and those traces can echo in another. So, as we begin this reflection, hold this image: two hearts in separate rooms, yet listening to the same silent music. That is the essence of synchronicity. It is the setup for every sign, every dream, every sudden shift we will explore. And it reminds us of a deeper truth, that the soul knows before the voice speaks, and connection begins long before words are formed. We ended before with an image: two hearts in separate rooms, yet listening to the same silent music. That picture captures the harmony of connection. But harmony never stays untouched for long. It is often when the soul begins to notice subtle patterns that doubt, unease, and inner conflict first arise. This is the first fracture, the moment when what once seemed ordinary no longer feels random, yet still cannot be explained. A woman goes about her day, steady and composed, until a sudden heaviness falls across her chest. She tells herself it is stress, perhaps fatigue. Later, she learns that at that very hour, someone she loves was carrying sorrow. Another wakes with a restless anxiety, only to discover that another soul was moving through conflict at the same time. These are the moments that do not fit neatly into reason. yet they refuse to be ignored. And here, the fracture begins, not only between two people, but inside the psyche itself. Modern life trains us to demand proof. We cling to logic like armor and dismiss anything we cannot measure. The persona, the mask we wear for the world, tells us to stay rational, to brush away what cannot be charted. Yet, the unconscious whispers otherwise. The shadow presses forward, saying, "Something is stirring." It does not speak in clear words, but in moods, symbols, and sudden shifts. And when these inner voices clash, tension rises within us. We want certainty, but what we receive are echoes, coincidences, and the weight of feeling that seems to come from nowhere. Carl Jung described this threshold with the language of synchronicity. Events unfold side by side without visible cause, yet they strike us as charged with meaning. Imagine thinking of someone intensely and then hearing their name spoken by a stranger. Imagine nearly sending a message only to see their words arrive first. To the rational mind, these are accidents. To the unconscious, they are signs that the hidden fabric of connection has begun to show itself. And once the fabric shows, we cannot easily go back to ignorance. The first fracture is not dramatic. It is subtle. It is a sudden doubt in the persona we have built, the part of us that insists we are self-contained and untouched by invisible bonds. The fracture reminds us that we are porous beings. Feelings move through us that are not always our own. We sense what another carries, and in doing so, we question what belongs to us and what belongs to them. This uncertainty can be unsettling because it threatens the stability we worked so hard to build. Think of the contrast. On one side, the mask, the neat routine, the polite smile, the assurance that all is well. On the other side, the shadow, restless moods, unfinished memories, sudden images that break through the surface. These two parts do not yet speak the same language. The persona insists on order. The shadow insists on truth. And when synchronicity breaks into daily life, the conflict between mask and inner voice becomes unavoidable. We might call this the wound of uncertainty. It is the sense that reality is shifting under our feet. We cannot tell whether what we feel is imagination or genuine resonance. We ask ourselves, is this mine or is this theirs? Am I losing my clarity or am I finally seeing what has always been there? These questions cut deep because they confront us with the limits of rational control. They show us how little we can explain and how much we must learn to trust the symbols of the inner life. When the fracture opens, it is tempting to run back to certainty. Many do. They dismiss the signs, laugh off the dreams, bury the moods under distraction. They say, "It's nothing. It means nothing." Yet the unconscious does not stop speaking simply because we cover our ears. It finds other ways to appear through dreams, through restless emotion, through patterns that repeat until we finally turn to face them. Jung reminded us that what we resist not only persists, but controls us. And so ignoring the fracture only makes the inner tension grow stronger. But there is another way. Instead of denial, we can choose observation. We can pause when the sudden shift comes and ask what is being mirrored here. If I feel sadness without cause, is it awakening my own buried grief, or is it stirring because of a bond with another? Neither answer must be final, but both open the door to self-knowledge. The fracture then becomes not only a wound, but an invitation, a chance to discover how connected our unconscious truly is. This is also where projection often enters. Jung taught that when the unconscious energy is strong, we may project images onto others. We believe it is their emotion we are sensing, when in truth, it may be our own reflection cast outward. This is why the first fracture is so difficult. It is not simply about one relationship. It is about learning to discern between what belongs to us and what belongs to the other. It is about discovering how the unconscious mirrors itself through connection. The stakes at this stage are quiet but profound. If we ignore the fracture, we remain trapped between mask and shadow, between rational denial and restless emotion. We risk becoming haunted by moods we cannot explain. But if we turn toward it with honesty, we begin to cultivate a deeper listening. We begin to honor what arises without demanding instant proof. And this listening sets the stage for awakening the realization that synchronicity is not a trick of the mind, but a sign of the soul's wider language. Notice how the fracture shows up in daily rhythms. A sudden change in mood, a recurring thought that interrupts focus, a dream so vivid it lingers into daylight, a name appearing again and again in places that should be unrelated. Each of these moments pulls against the persona demanding recognition. And in each, the unconscious says there is more to reality than you allow yourself to see. The fracture opens a doorway, but whether we step through is our choice. For many, this stage is marked by fear, fear of being foolish, fear of misreading, fear of exposing a longing the other may not share. Fear belongs to the persona, which depends on safety and control. Yet alongside fear, there is also awe. The possibility that we are more deeply woven together than we dared to imagine. The sense that what feels random may be filled with meaning. It is in this tension between fear and awe that the first fracture takes root. The journey of individuation always passes through such fractures. We cannot reach integration without first facing the cracks in the mask. These cracks are not failures. They are signs that the soul is pressing forward, demanding a wider truth. The fracture between persona and shadow is painful, but it is also fertile ground. It prepares us to awaken to the depth of connection, to see beyond surface appearances, and to begin the work of aligning outer life with inner truth. So, let us rest here for a moment. The first fracture is not the end of stability, but the beginning of consciousness. It is the moment when coincidence no longer feels random, when the unconscious begins to speak in a voice we cannot deny. It destabilizes, yes, but it also invites. It reminds us that beneath the surface, something real is moving. And if we have the courage to listen, this fracture becomes the path toward transformation. The fracture has opened. Coincidences no longer feel like accidents, and moods arrive without clear cause. Something has shifted, and the unconscious begins pressing forward. Now we enter the conflict stage, the struggle between what we show and what we hide between the persona and the shadow. Every human being carries a mask, and this mask is not false in the sense of being a lie. It is a necessary role. The persona allows us to walk through the world to function in families, work, and society. It is the polished face that says, I am fine, even when something deep inside is unsettled. Without the persona, life would be raw and chaotic. Yet when the unconscious begins to stir, the persona can become too tight, too rigid, and its cracks begin to show. The shadow lives just behind this mask. It carries everything that has been repressed, ignored, or deemed unworthy of daylight. It holds our fears of rejection, our hunger for closeness, our anger, and even our unspoken longing. When synchronicity and emotional resonance enter life, the shadow is awakened. It whispers through dreams, unsettles moods, and demands to be noticed. And this is where the tension grows. The persona insists on control, while the shadow insists on truth. Consider the woman who keeps her voice calm and her posture strong. She assures herself that the sudden mood is nothing. But in private, her shadow is restless. She feels pulled to check for signs, to replay memories, to imagine unspoken conversations. Her persona says, do not be foolish. Yet her shadow replies, this is real, even if you deny it. The more she resists, the louder the shadow becomes. This battle costs us energy. The mask consumes strength to maintain appearances, while the shadow consumes strength through longing and unrest. The person caught in between feels drained, distracted, unable to concentrate fully on present tasks. This is the psychological toll of the unresolved split. Jung observed that neurosis often arises where there is division between what the conscious self admits and what the unconscious insists upon. One of the ways the shadow speaks is through dreams. A dream may present an image of a locked house, a door that will not open, or a stranger who knows too much. These symbols carry meaning. The locked house is the hidden self. The unopened door is the boundary between persona and shadow. The stranger is the part of us we have yet to meet. Dreams like these are not random. They are invitations to dialogue with the unconscious, to see beyond the mask. The shadow also appears in projection. We may believe that the other person is causing all of our unrest, that they are the reason we cannot sleep or stay steady. In truth, the other becomes a mirror. They reflect the unfinished business of our own inner world. The longing, the fear, the hope, it lives within us, but we see it outside of us wearing another's face. This is why the shadow is so powerful. It draws us toward others while really pointing us back to ourselves. The persona resists this knowledge. It prefers the clean story, I am fine. My life is under control. These feelings are only tricks of the mind, but the shadow breaks this illusion. It forces us to admit that not all of life is logical, and not all of our strength is under conscious command. This is a painful admission for many, especially in a culture that prizes independence and self-control. Yet without this recognition, individuation cannot begin. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, of integrating shadow and persona, unconscious and conscious, so that we live in truth rather than pretense. The conflict between shadow and persona is the doorway to this process. When we begin to notice how often we hide, deny, or repress, we are already closer to wholeness. But the journey requires honesty. the courage to admit what unsettles us, and the humility to see how often we deceive ourselves with the mask. The cost of ignoring the shadow is high. Suppressed emotions leak into the body, appearing as tension fatigue or restlessness. Relationships grow strained because the mask cannot sustain intimacy, and the sense of synchronicity, which might have been a bridge to deeper understanding, becomes instead a torment, repeated coincidences that feel more like wounds than wonders. This is the warning sign that the split between persona and shadow has become too great. But when we dare to face the shadow, something shifts. We begin to see patterns we had overlooked. We realize that the sudden sadness may not only be about the other person, but about our own unfinished grief. We understand that the recurring image of a closed door is not only about their silence, but about our own reluctance to open. In this way, the shadow begins to guide us. It stops being merely disruptive and becomes a teacher. Let us look more closely at the symbols of this conflict. The mask polished and smiling is light without depth. The shadow dark and restless is depth without clarity. When they meet, there is discomfort, yet only by bringing light into shadow and depth into the mask do we become whole. Jung often said that enlightenment does not come from imagining figures of light, but from making the darkness conscious. The shadow is that darkness. It is not evil. It is the part of us waiting to be integrated. This stage of conflict is unavoidable. Every person who walks the path of deeper awareness must confront the difference between the self they show and the self they hide. The persona keeps us safe, but safety alone cannot bring meaning. The shadow carries the truth, but truth alone can overwhelm. Individuation requires both. In relationships, this struggle shows itself in many ways. A sudden silence that feels heavy, as though the words are being withheld. A recurring dream that unsettles, but also intrigues. A mood that sweeps over us without cause, as if someone else's storm has entered our field. These experiences stir the shadow, because they reveal how vulnerable we are. They remind us that we cannot control everything. And in this reminder lies the beginning of wisdom. The shadow also challenges us to confront desire. The persona may insist on modesty, composure, and self-sufficiency, but the shadow reveals hunger for love, for recognition, for intimacy. Denying this hunger does not erase it. It only drives it deeper where it grows more powerful. To face the shadow is to admit the depth of our longing and to honor it without letting it consume us. This is delicate work requiring honesty and compassion. Many resist this stage, fearing that facing the shadow will make them weak. But the opposite is true. Denial makes us brittle. Integration makes us strong. When we admit the parts we fear, we stop being controlled by them. This is the paradox. Jung understood. What we repress controls us, but what we accept transforms us. The shadow is not meant to be destroyed. It is meant to be integrated into a fuller self. The battle between persona and shadow is like standing between two mirrors. One reflects the face we show the world. The other reflects the hidden depths. In between stands the self pulled in both directions, uncertain where to turn. The temptation is to choose one and reject the other. But the true path is to stand in the tension, to hold both images and to allow them to merge into a more complete whole. As this stage unfolds, the cost of pretense grows heavier. The more we cling to the persona, the more restless the shadow becomes. The more we deny the shadow, the more fragile the persona feels. This is the crucible of transformation. It is not comfortable, but it is necessary. Without this struggle, we remain half alive, living only through roles and appearances. With it, we move closer to authenticity. So the invitation here is not to choose mask or shadow, but to see both clearly. To notice when the smile hides unrest. To notice when the sudden sadness carries truth. To recognize that synchronicity may be the soul's way of forcing the mask to crack so the hidden self can breathe. This awareness prepares the ground for awakening the moment when we begin to read the signs not as torment, but as guides. Let us end this part with a reflection. The shadow versus persona is not a battle to be won, but a relationship to be reconciled. The mask allows us to live in society. The shadow ensures we remain human. Only by holding both can we walk toward wholeness. And as this balance begins, the deeper work of transformation can finally take root. The conflict between persona and shadow cannot continue forever. The mask grows heavy, and the hidden parts of the self press harder for recognition. At first, this feels like unrest, but over time, something unexpected happens. A shift occurs not through louder demands, but through a quiet awakening. The psyche begins to recognize that what once felt like chaos carries meaning, and that synchronicity is not the enemy of reason, but its necessary complement. This awakening often begins in small ways. A dream that once felt confusing is suddenly understood as symbolic. An emotional wave that seemed irrational is recognized as resonance with another soul. A repeated coincidence no longer feels random, but is seen as part of a wider pattern. The mind has not surrendered its clarity, but it has softened, allowing the unconscious to speak in its own language. Jung reminded us that the unconscious does not speak in logic. It speaks in images, symbols, and moods. To awaken is to learn this language. Think of it as reading beneath the words. In ordinary life, we take words at face value. We assume silence means nothing, coincidence means accident, and dreams are only fantasy. But the awakened perspective sees silence as heavy with meaning, coincidence as synchronicity, and dreams as the soul's most honest speech. The unconscious has always been speaking. Awakening is simply beginning to listen. Jung often described this moment as the meeting of opposites, persona and shadow, conscious and unconscious, reason and intuition. They do not cancel one another, but instead reveal a larger wholeness when held together. Awakening is not about rejecting the persona or glorifying the shadow. It is about allowing both to be present and to serve their rightful roles. The persona protects, the shadow reveals. Together, they guide the individual toward individuation, the process of becoming whole. One of the most powerful symbols for this stage is the mirror. Earlier, the mirror was a place of tension. We saw a mask in one reflection and a hidden self in the other. Awakening is the moment when the two images begin to merge. The mask softens, the hidden self steps forward. You look into the mirror, and for the first time, see not a divided image, but the outline of a more authentic whole. This is not final integration, but it is a beginning. Dreams also carry new weight at this stage. A recurring dream of a closed door may suddenly shift. The door cracks open, light spilling through. Or a dream of being pursued transforms into a dream of dialogue where the pursuer speaks instead of chasing. These shifts are the unconscious signaling readiness. It is not only sending symbols, but inviting you into relationship with them. To awaken is to accept the invitation to treat the dream as a message worthy of listening. In relationships, awakening shows itself in how we interpret the bond. Before synchronicity caused fear. Am I imagining this? Am I losing clarity? Now it becomes a tool of insight. If a thought arises at the same time as a message, you no longer panic. You pause, observe, and ask, what is this moment showing me about the connection? What part of myself is being mirrored here? This shift from fear to inquiry is the mark of awakening. Awakening also changes the experience of silence. Before, silence felt unbearable, and emptiness filled with anxiety. Now, silence is recognized as alive, a field carrying unspoken emotion. It may still be uncomfortable, but it is no longer meaningless. Silence becomes part of the dialogue, and you begin to hear what is unsaid. In Jungian terms, you are learning to read the projections and energies that move in the collective unconscious. This stage also brings clarity about the anima, and animus, the inner images of the opposite sex that live within each psyche. When you feel drawn to someone with unusual intensity, it may be because they embody this inner figure for you. A man may project his inner feminine, the anima, onto a woman. A woman may project her inner masculine, the animus, onto a man. These projections make the bond feel larger than life, charged with archetypal weight. Awakening is recognizing the projection for what it is, not denying the connection, but understanding that part of what you feel belongs not to the other person, but to your own inner world. This realization is liberating. It means you can honor the bond without being consumed by it. You can see the other person not only as an object of desire or longing, but as a mirror of the self you are becoming. Jung described this as the path toward individuation, where outer relationships become catalysts for inner growth. Awakening is realizing that the connection is real, but its deepest purpose may be your own transformation. At this stage, the individual also learns the value of discernment. Not every coincidence is a message. Not every mood belongs to another. Awakening is not about blind belief, but about careful attention. You begin to ask, is this synchronicity repeating? Does it carry emotional charge? Does it awaken something within me that feels authentic? With these questions, you move from superstition to wisdom. You treat the signs not as proof, but as guidance, allowing intuition to walk beside reason. There is a softness in this stage. The frantic energy of doubt calms. The heavy pull of the shadow lessens as it is acknowledged. The persona once rigid becomes more flexible. You may still feel tension, but the tension is creative now, not destructive. It is like the string of a violin, pulled tight enough to resonate, but not so tight that it breaks. Awakening means you are learning to play the music of your own psyche. The image of the lake is helpful here. On the surface, ripples may seem random, but beneath currents flow shaping the movement of water. Awakening is the recognition that your moods, your coincidences, your dreams are like ripples on the surface of a larger, unconscious lake. They are not accidents. They are expressions of a deeper current. And when two people are connected, their ripples can meet, creating patterns that neither could produce alone. This is the mystery of resonance, and it is only visible when the eyes of the soul are open. Awakening also brings humility. You realize how much of life has been guided by the unconscious long before you were aware of it. You see how often you mistook projection for reality, how often you dismiss synchronicity as accident. This humility does not shame you, it grounds you. It reminds you that the unconscious is vast and that we are always students of its language. As awakening deepens, gratitude often appears. Gratitude not necessarily for the other person, though that may be part of it, but gratitude for the soul's ability to speak. Gratitude that life carries meaning beneath the surface. Gratitude that even in confusion, the unconscious was guiding you toward truth. This gratitude softens the heart and prepares it for transformation. But awakening is not the end of the journey. It is only a stage one that prepares the ground for choice. For once you can read the language of the unconscious, you must decide how to live with it. Will you continue projecting? Will you remain entangled in longing without clarity? Or will you set boundaries that honor both the bond and your own worth? These are the questions that lead into transformation, the next step on the path. So, let us hold the image of this stage, the mirror reflecting both mask and hidden self. The door, once locked, now opening with a crack of light. The lake whose ripples reveal a deeper current. These are symbols of awakening. They remind us that life is more than surface, and that meaning often hides in silence, in coincidence, and in dreams. Awakening does not erase the shadow or the persona. It teaches us to read them, to see the wisdom they contain. And with this vision, we are ready for the next step, the moment when insight turns into boundary and awakening into transformation. Awakening gives us vision, but vision alone does not change a life. It shows us the language of the unconscious, the symbols that speak beneath words. Yet to awaken without acting is to remain suspended between knowing and doing. The soul asks for more. It asks for a decision. This is where the path of transformation begins, when we move from awareness into boundary, from seeing into choosing. The connection that once felt like torment is now understood as meaningful. But even here, the temptation to drift remains. Without choice, synchronicity becomes an endless loop messages. Without clarity, dreams. Without resolution, moods that echo back and forth without direction. The unconscious may speak, but the ego must decide how to respond. Jung taught that individuation requires both sides. The unconscious provides depth, but the conscious self provides form. Transformation happens only when the two join in action. Boundaries are the first form this action takes. They are not walls of coldness. but lines of clarity. A boundary says, I will honor the signals, but I will not live only for them. I will measure connection, not only by symbols, but by deeds. This is not a rejection of the unconscious, but its integration. It is the moment when you learn to translate resonance into standards, to ask for real presence instead of chasing silent echoes. Consider the contrast. Before, silence felt alive but unbearable, pulling you into endless wondering. After awakening, silence is recognized as communication in itself. Now, in transformation, silence becomes a teacher of limits. It says, if words never come, I will not wait forever. My soul can love in silence, but my life requires action. This boundary does not kill connection. It refines it. It filters what is genuine from what is projection. In psychological terms, this is the movement from projection to integration. Earlier, the anima or animus image was placed onto the other, making them larger than life. Now you begin to call back those projections. You see the qualities you admired or longed for as seeds within yourself. If you saw wisdom, you cultivate it in your own voice. If you saw strength, you awaken it in your own body. This reclamation lessens the intensity of projection and strengthens the sense of self. The boundary is not only between you and the other, it is between you and your own illusions. The shadow, once restless and disruptive, becomes an ally here. It no longer bursts through as uncontrolled mood, but serves as a guide for boundaries. It whispers when a line is crossed, when self-worth is at risk, when longing tips into self-abandonment. To listen to the shadow in this way is to use it as compass rather than saboteur. Jung often said the shadow holds not only darkness, but also untapped potential. Transformation happens when we harness that potential in the form of choice. This stage is also marked by a shift in energy. Before, you may have felt consumed by the invisible bond, restless and drained by its constant pull. Now, by setting standards, your energy begins to return to you. You stop pouring life into what does not respond in kind. Instead, you redirect it into your own growth, your work, your friendships, your creative expression. The connection may remain, but it no longer defines your vitality. It becomes one thread in a larger tapestry rather than the entire fabric. Let us picture this with a symbol. Imagine a house with many rooms. For a long time, you stood only at one door, waiting for it to open. Awakening showed you that the door was real and meaningful, but still unopened. Transformation is the moment you turn and see the rest of the house rooms filled with light and possibility. You do not abandon the door, but you refuse to live in front of it forever. This choice restores dignity. It says your life is more than waiting. Boundaries are not always easy to set. They may stir fear. Fear of losing, the bond, fear of missing a chance. Fear of stepping into solitude. Yet here the deeper truth emerges. A boundary is not a loss, but a protection. It guards the soul from scattering itself across endless projections. It creates the space where genuine connection can appear, where the other meets you not only in symbols, but in presence. Without boundaries, synchronicity can entrap. With boundaries, it can guide. This is also the stage where you stop chasing explanations. You no longer demand to know whether every mood belongs to you or to the other. Instead, you treat feelings as information. You ask, what is this showing me about myself? How do I respond with integrity? In this way, you free yourself from obsession with the other's inner world. You claim responsibility for your own. This shift is one of the clearest signs of individuation, moving from dependence on the outer image to strength rooted within. Jung's words remind us, what you accept transforms you. Boundaries are a form of acceptance. They accept the reality of connection without demanding certainty. They accept the presence of longing without being ruled by it. They accept the shadow's restlessness as part of growth. And in this acceptance, transformation begins. In daily life, this transformation shows itself in practical ways. You no longer answer every impulse to reach out. You pause, reflect, and act only when it aligns with your values. You stop interpreting every coincidence as destiny, and instead ask whether it carries repetition, depth, and resonance. You shift from waiting for proof to requiring consistent presence. These small acts are profound, for they turn insight into lived truth. This is also the stage of reclaiming time. Hours once spent in restless thought are redirected into creating, learning, or simply resting. Energy once lost in projection returns as strength for personal growth. This reclamation is not selfish. It is individuation in practice. The unconscious is honored, but the conscious self leads with purpose. The two work together rather than at odds. Symbolically, this transformation can be pictured as moving from echo to voice. Before, you lived surrounded by echoes, never sure if they were yours or another's. Now, you begin to speak with your own voice. The echoes may remain, but they no longer drown you. Your voice carries through them steady and true. This is the power of boundary. It turns confusion into clarity, longing into dignity, connection into possibility. And so the great paradox of this stage is revealed. When you stop chasing echoes, you create the space where genuine reciprocity can appear. If the bond is real, the other will step forward, not only in symbols, but in action. If they do not, then you have still gained wholeness, for you have learned to hear yourself. Transformation is not about controlling the outcome. It is about living in integrity, regardless of outcome. As we close this part, hold these images. The house with many rooms, reminding you that life is larger than a single unopened door. The violin string tightened enough to resonate, but not to break. The echo transforming into voice. These are the symbols of choice and boundary. They remind us that individuation is not abstract theory, but daily decisions that honor the soul's language while protecting the heart. This is the stage where awakening becomes embodied, where vision becomes standard, where the unconscious is not only listened to, but lived with wisdom. It is the point where we stop asking only, "What does this mean?" and begin asking, "How shall I live with it?" That question is the beginning of true transformation. Every journey must find its resting place. We began with the mystery of connection, the strange sense that two souls can resonate even in silence. even across distance. We traced the fracture, the conflict of mask and hidden self, the awakening that teaches us to read the language beneath words, and the transformation that comes when boundaries are chosen with dignity. Now, we arrive at the closing arc where the scattered threads are gathered into meaning and the restless heart finds stillness. The truth is that not every bond will be spoken, and not every resonance will become a relationship. Yet what matters most is not whether the other steps forward, but whether you learn to stand whole within yourself. The deepest purpose of synchronicity, dreams, and symbols is not to trap you in longing, but to awaken you to your own inner life. Jung taught that the unconscious is always guiding us toward wholeness. When you sense another's presence in silence, when you dream of someone who lingers in your soul, the invitation is not only about them, it is also about you. It is about recognizing how much of your own longing, strength, and depth has been waiting behind the mask. The other may be part of the story, but the central figure is always your own emerging self. This is why individuation matters. Individuation is the path of becoming whole, not by erasing the persona, not by destroying the shadow, but by weaving them into a larger harmony. It is the process of standing in the truth of who you are, no longer divided between the self you show and the self you hide. The journey through resonance and boundary teaches you that you do not need endless proof to trust your worth. You learn that connection is real, but dignity is necessary. You learn that love begins not with waiting for someone else to see you, but with opening your own eyes to your wholeness. At this final stage, clarity softens the earlier turmoil. Silence no longer feels like punishment, but space. Coincidence no longer feels like obsession, but symbol. Dreams no longer feel like escape, but guidance. Each of these speaks the same truth: the soul is alive, and it will not abandon you. You are not left in emptiness. You are being shown how deeply your inner life matters. There is freedom here. You can still feel the connection, but you no longer need it to define you. If it grows into something real, it will be through action, not only through echoes. If it fades, you remain whole, for you have already reclaimed yourself. This is the final integration, honoring what the soul reveals, while also protecting the heart with standards rooted in self-respect. The symbolic image of this stage is a door that opens inward. At first, you stood outside, waiting for another to unlock it. Awakening taught you to see the door itself. Transformation taught you to walk away when necessary to explore the house of your life. And now in closure, you realize that the true door was never locked by another at all. It opens inward into the depth of your own being. It leads to a space where you rest in yourself, connected to the world, yet not dependent on its constant reassurance. This is the essence of Jung's wisdom. What we resist controls us, but what we accept transforms us. When you accept that connection may exist without certainty, you are freed from endless seeking. When you accept that silence can carry meaning, you no longer fear it. When you accept your shadow instead of hiding it, you gain strength rather than shame. These acceptances weave together into peace. The lesson is not that we should distrust signs, nor that we should cling to them. It is that we should meet them with discernment and dignity. Synchronicity can be a gift, but it is not a command. Dreams can reveal truth, but they are not chains. Emotional resonance can point to love, but it must be met by real presence. In the end, connection must be lived, not only felt. The soul deserves more than echoes. It deserves authenticity. So what remains after all of this reflection? It is the understanding that your worth does not depend on whether another responds. It depends on whether you respond to yourself with honesty, with care, with courage. The deepest connection is always the one you cultivate with your own soul. When you live from that place, every relationship becomes clearer. You are no longer captive to projections. You are no longer divided between mask and shadow. You are integrated, steady, and free to love without losing yourself. As we close, let us return to the image of the two hearts beating in separate rooms. At first, this symbol carried mystery and longing, a sense of wonder at the invisible bond. Now, it carries peace. For even if the other heart remains unknown, your own has found its rhythm. It beats with clarity, with self-respect, with quiet joy in its own depth. This is the door that opens inward, and it is always yours to walk through. Beyond it lies a life no longer ruled by echoes, but enriched by meaning. A life where connection is honored, but the self is never abandoned. A life where the unconscious and conscious move together, not as enemies, but as companions on the path toward wholeness. And so we end here, not with final answers, but with an image, a truth, and an invitation. The image is the inward door. The truth is that individuation begins the moment you choose self-respect over illusion. And the invitation is this: walk forward with trust in your own depth, and let every connection serve not only love, but the shaping of a soul at peace. Before we part, I would love to hear from you. Which reflection in this journey spoke to your heart most deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if these words brought you clarity, consider subscribing so that we may continue exploring the mysteries of the soul together.